Good morning, everybody. I'm Martin Frost.
I'm Michael Ebner. Quite a pleasure meeting everybody here.
Welcome to London. If it's your first time in London, hope you're having fun here. By way of introduction, I am Michael's chairman at Hypervision Surgical. I've given him full permission to complain about his board. I've also got Matt Ginn in the audience, whose business I chair. So there's likely things going to be thrown at me at some point on the stage today. Prior to that, I was involved in starting CMR Surgical in 2014, and that was a journey that took us through 2020. At which point I came off the board. Now involved in 3 companies in the life science area. All three companies will be here in this conference. Michael?
Michael, it's a really nice meeting everybody. My introduction is probably much shorter given the different time skills and certain experiences. So my background really has been on the technical side, applied mathematics, which for those who know mathematics, there's not really a lot of applications that people see as part of that. So then really focused on medical image computing, and over time, mostly from innovation work at universities, spinning on Hypervision Surgical from King's College London, which on the way then, helping across paths with, including Martin. So very delighted to be here on stage now with you and talk a bit about the journey.
Uh-huh. And I know you're going to interrogate me for most of this, Michael, but before you start, so when you, from a CEO point of view, were thinking about what would a good board look like, what was written on your blank piece of paper?
So it's obviously a very difficult question. So again, like trying to anchor this from, of course, many of you have their own founding stories, but essentially when you're first-time founder, most from technical side, it's really hard to know what ideal shall look like. And it's all from really important as well to then cross paths with those who have come the journey before. So I had the pleasure actually with many who are here today in this room that have had plenty of interactions and helped and as well define what it could look like. For me in particular, it has always been really trying to figure out what the blind spots could be, trying to understand what you don't yet know. And that, of course, like the first, guess is clearly on the commercial side. As from the academic sphere, close on the clinical and technical world. And someone like you, Martin, of course, brings a lot of weight to being able to understand what it takes to navigate commercially. And of course, by extension, the board to help foster these types of relationships.
Yeah. So I think my experience at CMR was interesting on boards. I think I managed to work my way through 4 chair people.
Still at number 1.
Rather than the other way around. I remember my last chair said to me, Martin, my job is to support you, a bit like a chairman of a football club to a football manager. My job is to support you until the minute I ask you to leave. That was really encouraging.
When did that happen?
That's a really interesting topic, actually, because boards, of course, have to evolve, and management teams have to evolve, because there aren't many examples of people starting a company and taking that company all the way through to exit. I mean, these days, when we're looking at timescales of 10, 12 years, I'm 62 now. The thought of having to do another 6 years leading a company would have been a daunting one. But that evolution of roles, senior roles in companies like CMR, very, very difficult, very, very difficult indeed. And when I look back on that, the board did a couple of good things and then a terrible thing. The couple of good things it did was to identify in advance that there needs to be some evolution of leadership, and to discuss, what that might look like before and after, because there's always a sensitive subject around, is it a good idea for the founder, the CEO, other founders to stay on in the company once you bring the CEO into that company? I stayed on the board of CMR for about 6 months or so. after my role changed, and I've been involved in conversations around transition of leadership for a few months, until the point where I discovered that the board had actually already talked to the person who was going to succeed me, a couple of months before, which wasn't playing fair. At which point, we had a few conversations around that. But I think it's very, very hard for founders such as yourself, Michael, to have all of the skills necessary to build a business to the point where you have regulatory approval on a product and then to scale it globally. That's a very, very difficult thing to do. And especially from the UK, where we have, until Organox, really very, very few examples.
I guess so. The one thing I would like to figure out also for the audience here, sort of like those could, if you're an executive, could you please raise your hand? That's roughly what I see here. For those who are executives, how many of you have do this now for the first time? 2. Well, so it's like then 3 as well with me here. So it's quite interesting. Those who have not raised their hands, which background do you have? Is it more on the investor side?
Yep.
And who's the half of the other audience then around here? Yeah, basically as well from technology support. So I guess the question, of course, that sort of I have as well for you, Martin, thinking back, what are the learnings that you've had along the way, and also how you then try to support as well, and impart this as part of Hypervision.
Yeah. So the CMR story legally started in January 2014. Actually, those of us, and Paul's in the audience today, was involved in the early conversations well before 2014. We know how long it takes to start a business, and the thinking that goes into it in advance. At CMR, we had to raise, in our seed round, I think we raised £3.8 million, which was difficult to raise with no product, no IP, no team. That was a fairly hard it was a fairly hard task, and literally spoke to hundreds of investors seeking to find the early investors in the company. But when with the benefit of hindsight, I look at what we accomplished and where we could have done better, and we sit in this room, and at the point where we started at CMR Surgical, there were maybe 2 or 3 companies in the surgical robotics space that we did diligence on, we could look at. They started a couple of years before us. The market obviously still dominated by Intuitive Surgical, phenomenally successful company. Why on earth would somebody seek to compete with a company like Intuitive? Very difficult. But at that time, we believed that we could bring something different to the market, some different thinking in terms of functionality, the way that the device will be handled, etc. And because we're in Cambridge in the UK, Cambridge is a fantastic place to recruit very talented engineering teams, and we did that very, very well. And the time it took for us to get from that, I think it literally was a design on the back of a napkin, if I remember correctly, through to a regulated product, was, for a very complex medical device, was, I think, just over 4 to 5 years. And that was phenomenally fast. And at that time, though, we believed that we had to get a product out there and in the hands of surgeons, because we had 2 very large companies in the form of Medtronic and J&J who were likely to be snapping at our heels. And the interesting thing is today is that really neither of those companies are yet at the point where they are entering the market to challenge Intuitive. So very often in our sort of business lives, actually, the single most important factor in success is timing. we talk about teams, we talk about capital, we talk about intellectual property, but timing is very often the single most important factor in a company's success. And I think we were fortunate in our timing. But I think in retrospect, we did get we made a couple of wrong assumptions and wrong turns, which is that at the point where we had a regulated product, and we'd done that very, very quickly, the company was able to raise a lot of capital. And there's some irony in what I'm about to say, but raising a lot of capital is sometimes can be a burden. Because if you raise too much capital, then you have to get your product into market. And sometimes that's your first generation product. You have to get that product into market very, very quickly. And actually, that product has sold well in the market. But when I look back on it in retrospect, what we really should have done in the company was limited launch, learnings from customers, second generation product, and then put our foot down. And we got some choices around that wrong at the time, partly because we believed that the market dynamics were going to be more competitive than actually, in retrospect, proved to be the case. So we got that wrong. Second thing, I think, when I think back on it, we benefit of hindsight could have done better, is that it's very difficult for a founding team to have all of the skills necessary to take a company through from incorporation, intellectual property filed, first product, commercialized product. So therefore the people you recruit, they need to go on a journey, and it's very hard for a team of 40 people, for those 40 people to continue to have the same scope in their roles. When the company is 600-700 people, actually what tends to happen is you get more specialists in, and people's scope of their role tends to narrow, and they no longer have quite the same challenge. Yeah. And actually, if you think about it, when I look back on it and I think of the way we designed our incentivization structures, share option schemes, etc., in some ways, and combined with the culture we built in the company, they were designed to make sure we never wanted people to leave. And I wonder whether, in retrospect, what we should have done is said, actually, people have got a great thing to do between here and here. And then we need to figure out, actually, how we're going to then recruit in people and then essentially allow people to go and do what they did at CMR somewhere else at that stage. And different types of share option schemes are not always best designed for things like that.
Yeah. I guess sort of like looking at that, how do you see as well the journey for Hypervision then a bit different as well? So
why don't you explain to folk in the audience, Michael, what Hypervision does today?
Happy to.
And then I'll answer the question.
So for those of you who do not know Hypervision Surgical, so what we are focusing on is really providing completely new ability of seeing information during surgery. So it's about, all of us, of course, are very familiar with laparoscopy. So you have a camera, you have basically an optical imaging system to see what the human eye would see. But all of us know there's so much information in the spectrum of light that is lost on the human eye, that is lost on existing vision systems. And now we have developed what is called a spectral imaging system. So fundamentally being able to see wavelengths that are beyond human vision capabilities and pairing this up with AI machine learning to then extract information. So in many ways, we have now provided a completely new platform approach that seamlessly integrates in all vision technologies in surgery, but going far beyond existing capabilities. And we have now, end of last year, secured UKSA marking as our first clearance, and also now a few months ago, FDA clearance, even to the point where the FDA gave us a new product code by having now a new ability for AI machine learning informed image reconstruction and visualization for real-time surgery. And that in many ways also kicked off some wonderful partnerships. And actually one of very important partnerships for Hypervision is IMEC. IMEC also represented here today and providing the next generation of sensing technology, which we now are developing in partnership to really further optimize for the context of surgery. So basically what we're aiming to do is, with a very lean concept of compact sensors that fit in all vision technologies and all vision systems, and machine learning AI, having then the future of tissue differentiation and characterization that is heavily software driven, because once these chips are in vision systems, then they keep on learning. And in many ways, it's kind of like a new, that every vision system can act as a new sensing tool. And that's really where we think the future is, less from complex hardware, but rather a very, carefully orchestrated addition or replacement of the future of sensing, and then having software evolutions to provide more insights. And that's now very exciting for us. The system is being deployed at 3 UK sites. The first indication is in general surgery, in particular colorectal surgery, where we aim to reduce anastomotic leakage. And we also have ongoing work in various GI-related studies there. And so now it's really the time for us to go towards an early market release and basically learn as well with a very targeted ability to refine our product based on software changes and now make it truly fit for purpose. So it's very exciting periods of time for us, in fact.
Yeah. So the reason I got involved in Hypervision Surgical is partly because Michael is probably the most persistent, annoying, annoyingly persistent, I should say, and person in medical devices. And also because when Paul and I and others were starting CMR, we believed in the end that the robot would become really the ubiquitous platform, and in the end, potentially not the big differentiator. And the big differentiator in the end would be either the quality of the instrumentation or the software, or in fact more now, the learnings from the data and the imaging. And I think next generation surgical imaging for me was always going to be that next wave. And I think getting involved at the early stages of a company that in the end can impact the whole industry, that was really very interesting.
I guess from your perspective, of course, given the experience you have as a founder, operator, advisor, mentor, board member as well for you, like where do you see actually most difficulties as well, and especially the early stages to get it right?
I think one of the most difficult things for early stage companies is to manage timing and timescale very, very carefully. I'm delighted to see Matt from IQ Endoscopes in the room too. And I think managing the expectations of the board, the investors around time to market, market entry, proof points, it's just a very, very difficult thing to do, because you're constantly working out cash out, how much capital you need to take to limited market launch, learnings from that launch. That's very difficult. The decision we took at CMR actually early on was to actually build a UK medical device manufacturing company. We were told that really couldn't be done, wouldn't be done. And now to see CMR at the point where there's a robotics factory just up the road in Ely is a very proud moment for us, really, because Cambridge has been responsible for a lot of innovation in that area. Cambridge is home to some of the best engineering consulting companies in the UK, but to actually have manufacturing here in the UK, before Donald Trump hammering that particular drum. That was great to us, and means that we get as much innovation in the manufacturing as we do in the device, actually. Now, whether or not Hypervision will go on that same journey is an interesting one, Michael, because I know that you have a different view in the end as to how Hypervision will be supplying into your market.
Yeah. Certainly trying to stay away from direct manufacturing as much as possible. I mean, for us, it's really in our core DNA, it's about software, and also the key expertise that we're having is in our way. It's about like key components like the chip, of course, making sure that we have the right partners to make that happen. But fundamentally, it's about like delivery of the systems in our way, and that was also for us really important at this early stage to figure out, okay, who could be those individuals that actually make it happen. I mean, for us, when we raised our first round. In fact, our pre-seed round, this was in 21, 22 at the time, was really about like reaching out to angel networks. And this was also then the way getting to know Martin as part of this. Because as you start, right, and if you read it from a clean slate, even a Rolodex of investors is what you don't yet have access to. So we really was then pretty much relentless, as you have said, in trying to figure out various different contacts who could be helping us. And angel networks, of course, as you will well know, are extremely interested in pairing not just up individuals who could provide funding, but rather those individuals who could help along the journey. And I still remember as part of the actual first interaction I've had in there at the time with an individual then trying to pair it, asking me what I was looking for, who is the individual that I was, would be liking to work with. And at the time, because I haven't done my homework at the time, I hadn't realized that Martin actually was part of the angel, of the Cambridge Angels. But I was describing somebody like Martin, really understanding, okay, if I wanted to be an individual joining in our board who has successfully gone through the early commercialization stages, who basically has navigated surgical vision and robotics space, and ideally, UK embedded environments. And this actually led to us initially providing further information. And she said, well, we might have somebody in our networks who could help you. And she initially suggested that's going to be a follow-up call, but after a week or so, she said, look, I have something better for you. Why not meeting this person? Why not meeting Martin Frost? And that, of course, was at the time an immense privilege, it felt, because as you start out, you still don't really have a lot of leads into the ecosystem. Speaking to Martin Frost, of course, was extremely important for us. We met then at King's Cross at the time, and I still remember, like, for the first probably half an hour, trying to convey what we're doing, because it's generally difficult in a highly complex environment. And once I pulled out, and I realized, of course, it was close to Martin's heart. I mean, vision is close to robotics. I knew it's important to him, but I still couldn't convey the importance in terms of market size. And at some point, I just, like a desperate, I pulled out the spreadsheet and said, look, this is all the information here, all the things that I was running through. And then, now I'm getting interested. And this then led to actually further conversations.
Yeah.
And it was very clear. Look, Michael, there's so much going on right now. Like, I cannot do any investment. I cannot do any advisorship. I cannot do any board member. And I certainly will never be your chair. But over time, we had then at least irregular relationship of, asking for advice. And I think the key moment was that after having worked for about a year, effective in a mentorship capacity, quite informally. And when we were aiming to raise our seed round, and in fact, this was LSI at the time was extremely important to us, because the first time in London was when we then secured our seed investor. But in the run-up to that, people were always saying, look, Michael, you have a great team in terms of technology, or at least a lot of potential to be seen whether it actually works, but also very good potential in terms of clinical. But we don't believe that you can pull it up, that you can actually put it off commercially. And Martin saw that over like almost a year, me like putting like, my head against the wall and always getting the same result. And someone saying like, Martin, he didn't say to me, okay, fine, Michael. If you pull together a large enough round to believe what that means, but a few million, a large enough round, then I might be willing to go on the board. I was like, hey, sweet. I have no idea. Something that I could use as a hook. And that actually got us then towards more and more towards de-risking this in a way. But again, Martin told me, like, don't worry, Michael, I will never be your chair. Don't even think about it. But I might be on the board as a non-executive director. And that's really the way it started. I think what it highlighted was there's a lot of just having to be persistent, trying to just push for something that you know is effectively a limitation of the current team, of the current expertise, of the current journey. And in that capacity, keeping on pushing for what might be a better outcome. And as then the round was shaping up, and we had a set of 5 board directors. 2 were existing founders, 2 were investors, and 1 independent. And it was already shaping up more and more that it's going to be Martin, the independent there. And at some point, Martin tells me, look, Michael, I know what you're doing. Remember, I'm not going to be your chair. It's like, yeah, that's fine, Martin. You don't need to be our chair. But as long as I can have you as an independent and help us navigate. Mm-hmm. And as it worked out, of course, at some point, Martin, given all the experience, saying, look, Michael, given that I'm already doing the work as a chair and interacting as if I was a chair, would you mind if I take on the role as a chair? And that was, of course, immensely gratifying because it's been such a long journey, probably by then 2.5, 3 years of building this relationship. And I think when people always ask me what it takes to build the board and, find the right investor, so the right either independent or chair, my experience has always been it really takes years to invest into a relationship to find the right match. And it's genuinely hard for all of these relationships that one is building over time, who is going to be the right fit and who is going to be the right match. And so I think thus far we have been very fortunate to keep on learning and then making this happen.
I think when I look across the different companies I'm involved in the area, I think good boards can make a big difference. It's very tempting as somebody. It's very tempting as a sort of former CEO of a company in this area for you to want to go immediately to actually this is what we need to do, ABC. But I think the difficulty is obviously if you do that, then you're essentially doing the job of the CEO, and I don't think that's not appropriate. So it's actually quite difficult, I think, for people to make a good transition from being a CEO to chair, good non-exec board director. And it's also where I find it difficult is that the people side of building businesses is very important to me. If I don't fully buy into the values of the leader, no matter what the company is doing, I can't associate myself with the company. I just won't do it. And that naturally pulls you quite close to the CEO and makes you a backer of that person. But that's not necessarily really what the investors want you to do. And this is still a work in progress for me, insofar as I think the role between chair and CEO is very important. I think you really want the CEO to, my WhatsApp is full of WhatsApp from you, Michael, at 3 o'clock in the morning, 2 o'clock in the morning, 1 o'clock in the morning.
Well, I have burning questions, I'm sure.
You want the sort of relationship where you have that close contact, but that also takes you into a tricky territory of sort of independence. Yeah. Naturally. I also think, as far as Europe and the UK is concerned, obviously many companies here are seeking to go on that journey into commercialization in the United States, and that's also a tricky thing to do because you can't naturally find people in Europe, in the UK, who have done that. I can think of 2 companies immediately that are going on that transition and finding the right cultural and business fit is very tricky. Not least because we have different ideas in the UK and Europe about what's normal in terms of bluntly compensation. In that area, I think to get the right person on our board, as we commercialize into the US, will cost a lot more money than it costs us to find similar people in the UK and Europe. And then working out the comparatives then across existing board members, new board members, that's really very difficult.
Yeah.
Much so. But exciting. I think the other thing that I think we need more of, certainly in the UK and Europe, is people wanting to get involved. It's not enough to be doing a job. I think you have to be committed to helping a company, and the market for independent advisors, mentors, board members in this sector, in this country, is tricky.
No, indeed, very much so. And obviously as well, the community here, LSI is a very important one. Also, wonder at this stage, is it useful to be as well in mind in the audience for questions as well, and anything that you would like as well?
Well, I'd love to know. I'd love to know from the audience what are the key attributes you would look for in an independent chair. How important is market intelligence, market knowledge, the ability to find key investors, the personal human relationship with the team, time availability. I've been involved in 3 companies, I would say, all here over the next 2 to 3 days. Is how many is too many? What do folk think? Don't be shy.
So my name is Frank Billens. I'm a partner with IMEC Expand.
Yeah.
We are currently investing out of our second fund, which is a 300 million euro fund, investing in health tech, but also in deep tech opportunities. Actually, IMEC is a favorite partner for us in terms of research development. So I think the points you were describing for the chairman profile was a very good summary. We are currently looking for a chairman for one of our portfolio companies. Now, I think the challenge is that to find all those features, attributes in someone who's based in Europe is not obvious. There are certainly, like yourself, but it's a limited size pool. And what we usually would try to do for a company based in Europe is to look for a chairman in the US to bring that additional connection. So that's the only addition I would give in that.
And when you do that, if you have done it, does that have an implication for how many board meetings you can have? Because certainly, I've been on boards where we've had US board members, and they can come over for maybe 2 or 3 of them. And then having board meetings where there's a person who's joining virtually and the rest of the board is there physically. That's hard. It's hard to do if the US person is the chair.
And I agree with that comment. So having time, having affinity for Europe, and being able to travel at least a couple of times per year, that's a condition for sure. I think in the current environment, since Corona, we are used to web calls and so forth, but there should be physical meetings as well, and really frequent interactions like you described. I think is perfect. Yeah. Frequent interactions between chairman and CEO of a startup, sounding board, coaching. That's what you need.
Yeah. I'm also a sort of fan of small boards, which is often the problem we have, with companies that have investors with investor rights, consent rights to sit on boards. I think we certainly felt at times that the CMO board was just simply too many people. And you got too many vested interests around the table. You're trying to manage them. That becomes very difficult. I actually quite like the situation at Hypervision, where essentially it's a couple of investors, an independent, that's me, and Seb from the school, and Michael. That works pretty well, actually.
Very question as well over there.
Were you the chairman before you brought in Mark?
We haven't had. So the question was whether I was the chairman before Martin joined. It's quite a humbling question. So we didn't have a formal board before we closed our seed round. It was very much like co-founders, and with our pre-seed round, it was angel investors. We didn't have a structured board. That changed, and it's quite a different dynamics now, which of course is as part of the journey in establishing corporate governance and making sure we have the ability to have the right infrastructure for scaling with Martin that was introduced. Yeah.
So I think there is a difference, can be a difference between US and UK and European or UK companies, actually, where the role of president in the US can sometimes span what a chair would do in the UK. So typically there's greater sort of segregation of duties around that in the UK and Europe than there is in the USA. Yeah. How I think as chair, your job is to see where people are and aren't contributing, and then and then be clear with the person who's not contributing that you'll be replacing them. I mean, the advantage for non-exec director contracts is it costs a lot less money to terminate than it does for other types of contract. I think in terms of trying to apply what I've seen CMR and other companies to my own position, I prefer companies where I'm involved to know how long they can expect me to be involved, and I'd prefer to err on the lower side of that than the higher side of that, because I think boards need to evolve. They must evolve in order for the company to benefit from a good board. Certainly private companies. Yeah. Has anybody got any nightmare stories of boards that they'd like to share with the broader group of companies?
Only as long as you're the board members out here. Actually, I'm Alan Kersey with Oncolux, again in the imaging space. Yeah, I know Michael quite well, and we're also bringing some photodynamic therapy into play. It's interesting, your comments on founders and their incentives to stay.
Yeah.
And as management teams, you often find yourself, of course, after 4 years, re-incentivizing those very founders to stay even longer.
Yeah.
With cliff agreements on their shares to stay 1 year, 2 year, or whatever. But that does stand in the way of the company evolving in the right way and maturing in the right way.
Yeah.
It's an interesting idea that you have there to sort of incentivize them to do the job they need to do, and then move on to other pastures, as it were. But
I think that's there are various people who've put effort into sort of options which are sort of exit only options, but if you leave the company, you sort of retain your share of the pool. Or there's a lot of sort of innovative thinking around that, but I think the difficulty, obviously founders tend to own sort of ordinary or common shares outright and can take those away. I do know some investors who will insist that they sort of reverse vest. In fact, I think Paul, we did that at CMR, where actually had we left in the first 3 years of the company, we'd have lost some of our ordinary and common shares. And I think this is something also the university sector in the UK is trying to work out, which is what's the right way to set up a company in terms of how much of the company the university owns versus the founders own versus the academic founders who don't join the company. I think new investors tend to be honest, to put very little value on academic founders who aren't committed beyond a half, beyond 50% into a company, quite rightly, because they want interests aligned in the company. So there are certainly lots of examples of company, Oxford, Cambridge and London, where we're trying to work that out in terms of how much equity, how little equity should the university hold. Isn't it better that the university ends up with a smaller stake of a company which is worth a lot of money compared to a larger stake of a company that actually isn't going to achieve what it could?
Right.
Since I have the microphone, I get to ask one question. Michael, I'm curious, how do you think about, you talk a little bit about aligning incentives between the board, the academic founders, and the investors that come in later. How do you as the CEO think about your relationships differently with academic founders who may be part-time or not part of the day-to-day operations at this stage, the early investors that have their stake and are involved in their way, and then bringing in independent board members later to augment capabilities that may be missing from the core team or part of the next phase of growth?
It's a very interesting question. So I think every history of company is very different. For us, the fact that we are spinning out from the university, there is a real strength in having the assets, in our case, accessible. I mean, like we have an operating theater that we can use for development, for literally shortening the period of time for product development, which is all there. We have a very close relationship as part of this with various hospital sites that we can as well interact with for clinical studies. That means also co-founders, in this case, who are not jumping full time to the company. There is a real asset in having these links to various different parties that allows us to accelerate. Of course, the expectation has to shift, because when you start out with a small team, co-founders of 4, I certainly did expect people to take on more than they realistically could. Over time, one realizes on where the right sweet spot is, right? By having the ability that a company has now, the operative management taking on more and more responsibility, and having then as well co-founders very active, but almost in a sounding board capacity on the scientific development, on the clinical development, but also on the actual strategic engagement that is all accessible to a medtech hub around St. Thomas's that we are so closely embedded in. But managing these relationships is genuinely hard, right? In a way when people are not in a full-time capacity of different interests there. But I think it's always that, always trying to figure out what is it that one has within the core team, where does it have to be external parties, where also investors adding a completely new lens to what we have to be doing. But certainly that's, I think, I can imagine difficult at every stage. But when you start out, we were initially 4 co-founders. Now we are 16 full-time members. It's still small, but if you take on various consultants, various different, supporters, it's around 25. It already starts to be kind of getting an interesting complexity of managing that, especially because we're running things very tightly. I mean, we spent thus far £4 million to date, and we got through clearance in the UK, clearance in the United States, and closed extremely important partnerships now for scaling. So it's always the question on how much slack one allows oneself in managing relationships, or how tight they want to be. And I clearly want to have things as effectively as possible, but it also means figuring out what's ideal in each relationship is always, a new experience.
I think the interesting thing is as well, the Organox story, very interesting next door, is that when you have a success, all of a sudden you discover founders that you didn't know you had. Success has multiple fathers, and sort of failure is an orphan. So I'm identifying with that quite a lot at the moment.
I guess also, I think the way I see it is various different, individuals can add a lot of value in many different contexts, but also timelines, right? So certain individuals can be extremely important for a certain period of time, and unlocking key milestones. Then for another stage, it might not be directly sort of as much weight, but things again change. And I see this interplay of expertise is coming back and forth is so important as the journey of a company evolves. And I think it's also the excitement on learning on who are the right people at the right stage, how to curate this well ahead of time you need it, and then capitalize on the opportunity in the moment when it does arise and make it seem as seamless as it can be. And it's the hard one.
Yeah. How many minutes do we have? None.
Good.
Thank you very much. Okay. Thanks very much. I hope we've not offended anybody in the room who's, we'll see later. But nice to see everybody. Enjoy your conference. Thank you.